You have never been ignored by accident. Think about that for a moment. Not the times you were overlooked in a meeting, not the text that sat on read for 3 days, not the friend who forgot to include you until the plans were already finalized. None of it was accident. None of it was carelessness. It was response. Precise, automatic, and entirely predictable response to signals you have been broadcasting. In most cases, for years, without the faintest awareness that you were broadcasting anything at all. This is the part that cuts deepest when you finally see it. Not that people have treated you as less than you are worth. That would be simple cruelty, and cruelty is easy to dismiss. What is harder to sit with, what requires a particular kind of honesty that most people never develop, is the recognition that the treatment you have received has been, in every meaningful sense, accurate. Not accurate to your potential, not accurate to your intelligence, your loyalty, your capacity for depth, accurate to the signals you have been sending, accurate to the map you have been handing people and instructing them without words to follow. You are not invisible. You made yourself invisible, and you did it slowly, without realizing it. The question this video will answer is not why people have failed to see your value. That question is a trap. It places the problem outside you, where you cannot touch it, cannot change it, cannot use it. The question worth asking, the one that leads somewhere, is this: what have you been doing consistently that has made it rational for the people around you to treat you as optional? Every social interaction that has ever occurred between two human beings has contained, beneath the surface of its words and gestures, a transaction that neither party consciously acknowledged. Within seconds of encountering another person, in a boardroom, in a conversation, in a dating app message, in the way you enter a room, the human brain performs an assessment so rapid and so automatic that it bypasses conscious thought entirely. It reads posture, response time, word choice, the speed of agreement, the presence or absence of hesitation. It assigns a position, and it adjusts its behavior accordingly. This is not cruelty. It is not even conscious. It is the architecture of a species that has been navigating social hierarchies for hundreds of thousands of years. The brain is not asking whether you are a good person. It is not asking whether you deserve respect. It is asking a far simpler and far colder question: where does this person rank? And it answers that question not from what you say about yourself, but from what your behavior says about you, automatically, beneath your awareness. Every single time. The signals that broadcast low value are not dramatic. They are not the signals of someone who has obviously failed. They are subtle. They are the signals of someone who is trying too hard, in exactly the wrong ways. Over-explanation, the compulsive need to justify your decisions to people who did not ask for justification. Laughter that arrives too quickly. Agreement that comes too easily. The reflexive apology for occupying space that is yours by right. These are not character flaws in the conventional sense. They are behavioral patterns that emerged, most likely, from environments where they were once adaptive, where making yourself small kept you safe, where agreement kept the peace, where apology was the price of belonging. But here, now, in the environments where you are trying to build influence, attract desire, and command respect, they function as a tax, a constant, invisible, compounding tax on every interaction you have. Most people never realize this. They feel the effects, the overlooking, the dismissal, the sense that they are valued less than they are worth, but they interpret these effects as the product of other people's failures, other people's shallowness, other people's inability to see, and so they explain themselves more. They try harder. They become more available, more accommodating, more eager to demonstrate their worth. And the tax compounds. The moment you need their approval, you have already lost. Because the need itself is the signal, and the signal is being read. There is a law that governs perceived value in every domain of human experience, from the most intimate relationship to the coldest financial negotiation. It operates identically whether the object being valued is a commodity, a person, a piece of art, or an opportunity. The law is this: scarcity creates value. This is not a theory, this is a law, and it operates with the indifference of mathematics, without regard for the quality of what is being made scarce, without regard for the feelings of anyone involved. The neurological mechanism is precise. When the brain anticipates a reward that is certain, dopamine levels remain flat. The reward is already accounted for. It is priced in. But when the reward is uncertain, when it might come or might not, when its timing is unpredictable, the dopamine system activates in a fundamentally different way. It does not simply register the reward when it arrives. It produces anticipation, and anticipation, neurologically, is more powerful than satisfaction. The brain does not assign high value to what it can reliably access. It assigns high value to what it might lose. Now apply this with precision to the patterns of your daily life. There are two people. One responds to every message within minutes, regardless of what they are doing. Their availability is total, and their response is guaranteed. The other responds when they choose to. Sometimes quickly, sometimes after hours, sometimes the following day. Not out of manipulation, not out of game playing, but because their attention is genuinely occupied with the texture of their own life. Which of these two people is unconsciously perceived as more valuable? The answer is not a matter of opinion. It is the direct output of a neurological system that assigns worth based on scarcity, and both people are being assessed by that system in every person they encounter. Now consider the employee. Always available, always willing, first to volunteer, last to complain, eager to demonstrate value through relentless accessibility. This person believes, in good faith, that they are making themselves indispensable. They are, in fact, making themselves ordinary, because human nature does not reward availability. It perceives availability as abundance, and abundance, by the most fundamental operation of the value assignment system, registers as low worth. The friend who is always there, always willing to cancel their own plans, always ready to listen, always the one who reaches out first. This person is not valued because the people around them are ungrateful. They are valued less because they have removed the mechanism through which value is assigned. They have made themselves certain. And the brain, confronted with certainty, stops paying attention. The person trying hardest to be valued is, with stunning regularity, the person being valued least. Not because of cruelty, because of mechanism, but this is only the beginning. Because understanding scarcity only explains part of what is happening. The deeper machinery, the mechanism that makes constant availability, not merely neutral but actively destructive, requires a different lens. Reactance theory describes a psychological phenomenon that operates at a level beneath conscious choice. When a person senses that their access to something is being restricted, or that something they have may be withdrawn, their desire for that thing intensifies. This is not logic, it is reflex. The brain responds to perceived unavailability the way it responds to a closing door, with an urgency that it would not have felt had the door remained open. Constant availability eliminates this force entirely. When there is no door to close, there is no urgency. When there is no possibility of loss, there is no drive to secure. You have removed the mechanism that creates pursuit. Intermittent reinforcement operates on the same neurological substrate, and it is why the person who is inconsistently available creates an experience that is, quite literally, addictive. Not because they are more interesting, not because they are more worthy, but because the brain's reward system, confronted with an unpredictable pattern of availability and withdrawal, responds with the same escalating investment that drives every compulsive behavior from gambling to attachment to someone who will never love you back. The predictable person produces flatness. The unpredictable person produces obsession. This is not a moral statement. It is a description of mechanism. Mystery is a form of power. Familiarity is its destruction. This must be understood precisely, because it is commonly misread. Mystery is not secrecy for its own sake. It is not withholding information as a game. It is the natural consequence of having a life that is genuinely full of interests, ambitions, relationships, and internal complexity that does not need to be narrated to anyone in real time. The person who explains every decision, shares every thought, and is continuously present has committed the most costly social error available to them. They have removed the cognitive space in which the other person's imagination does its most important work. Familiarity is not closeness, it is the end of tension. And without tension there is no desire, no respect, and no perceived value. Now observe where this appears in your own behavior. Every time you explain a decision that was not asked about, you are not demonstrating transparency. You are demonstrating that you require the other person's approval to feel secure in the decision you have already made. Every time you narrate your reasoning in a conflict, you are not clarifying your position. You are submitting your position to their judgment and signaling, unmistakably, that their judgment holds power over you. The receiving brain reads this not as openness, but as insecurity, not as honesty, but as a bid for approval. And approval-seeking, in every social environment that has ever existed, is the behavior of the person with the lower position in the hierarchy. Now the situation becomes even darker, because even if you have understood everything in the first 3 sections, even if you have grasped the mechanism of scarcity, the power of mystery, the cost of over-explanation, none of it matters if you cannot govern the most visible signal of all, your emotional response. The fundamental equation is this: the person who reacts emotionally has already surrendered control of the interaction, not because emotion is weakness in some abstract philosophical sense, because reaction is evidence. When you react, when your voice sharpens, when you over-explain in response to criticism, when you pursue someone who has withdrawn, you have revealed something that every conscious and unconscious observer immediately registers. This person can be moved, and the person who can be moved can be leveraged, and the person who can be leveraged has already lost the most important part of any contest before it has formally begun. Marcus Aurelius understood this not as philosophy but as strategy. The core of his practice in the Meditations was this: you do not control what happens, you control your response to what happens. In every environment where this distinction has ever been applied, in battle, in courts, in boardrooms, in every arena where power changes hands, the person who has mastered their response has held a permanent structural advantage over the person who has not. This is not abstraction. This is the daily practice of identifying what is within your power and what is not, and refusing, deliberately and repeatedly, to exhaust yourself on the latter. Epictetus, who understood power more precisely than most, because he had experienced its complete absence, said this: some things are within our power and some things are not. Your opinions, your responses, your choices, these are yours. Everything else is not. The modern application of this is exact. When someone says something designed to destabilize you, to provoke you, to test where your edges are, and everyone does this, consciously or not, because the human social hierarchy is always being renegotiated, the question is not whether you feel the impact. The question is whether you show it. Feeling is not the failure. Displaying it is. Consider the argument. Not the argument where someone is right or wrong. That is irrelevant to what is being measured. The argument where one person stays cold and one person escalates. The person who stays coldest is not winning because they are more correct. They are winning because they appear most in control. And the appearance of control in the human social hierarchy is indistinguishable from the possession of it. Consider the workplace conflict. The person who reacts emotionally to a professional slight, who responds quickly, who over-explains, who makes their frustration visible, is automatically perceived as less competent, regardless of the merits of their position. Not because people are judging fairly, because the brain, under conditions of social evaluation, equates emotional regulation with capability and emotional reactivity with fragility. These are the rules of the environment. Complaining about them is a reaction. Learning them is power. Silence is not emptiness. It is pressure. The person who says nothing after a provocation has not failed to respond. They have made a choice that communicates something the other person cannot ignore. I am not disturbed. And the person who cannot be disturbed cannot be controlled. Here is where the real power begins. Because all of the principles covered so far, scarcity, mystery, emotional control, converge in a single behavioral structure that either holds them together or dissolves them entirely. That structure is the boundary. And the boundary is almost universally misunderstood. A boundary is not a statement. It is not a declaration. It is not the speech you deliver about what you will and will not tolerate. Every person who has ever explained their limits at length, narrated their pain, and then continued to absorb the behavior they described, has not set a boundary. They have issued an invitation to test further, because the person on the receiving end has learned something precise. The words do not cost them anything. The relationship continues regardless. The explanation was performance, not architecture. This is the foundational distinction. A boundary is built not from words but from consequences, consistent, proportionate, and delivered without announcement. Every time a person explains why they have a limit, they are doing something that appears like assertion and functions like submission. They are submitting the limit to the other person's judgment. They are saying, in effect, I will hold this position, but only if you agree it is reasonable. This is not a boundary. It is a negotiation in which you have already conceded the most important point. The person who understands this operates differently. When a behavior crosses a line, there is no speech. There is a consequence. Availability decreases. The investment shifts. The person withdraws. Not dramatically, not with announcement, but measurably and unmistakably. The other person does not receive an explanation. They receive information. And information delivered through action is received with a weight that words can never achieve, because it cannot be argued with, cannot be debated, cannot be dismissed as emotion. In a relationship, this looks like this. The person who says, I don't like it when you do that, and then continues to show up with the same warmth, regardless of whether the behavior changes, has communicated nothing. The person who simply becomes less available, quietly, without drama, without narration, after a pattern of disrespect, has communicated everything, not with cruelty, with certainty. And certainty is the only currency that the human brain, in its most honest moments, genuinely respects. In the workplace, the employee who complains about being taken advantage of is asking for a conversation. The employee who quietly stops extending their expertise beyond their defined scope, without announcement, without manifesto, has changed the cost calculation. They have not asked for respect. They have made disrespect expensive. Respect comes from consequences, not explanations. And this is the part that will disturb you most. Because everything discussed until this point, scarcity, mystery, emotional control, the architecture of consequences, rests on a single foundation. And that foundation is not a technique. It is not a tactic. It is a state. The state of genuine willingness to walk away. The person who is truly willing to leave any situation, any relationship, any opportunity, any dynamic that does not serve them, holds the most structurally powerful position available in any human interaction. Not because they are aggressive, not because they are indifferent to outcome, but because the tools of leverage, the social pressure, the emotional manipulation, the implied threat of withdrawal, all of these tools require one thing to function: an attachment that can be threatened. Remove the attachment, and the tools are disarmed. The person who genuinely does not need the outcome cannot be coerced toward it. Daniel Kahneman's work on prospect theory established with experimental precision what strategists have known for millennia. Humans feel the pain of loss approximately twice as intensely as the pleasure of equivalent gain. This asymmetry governs behavior at a level beneath rational thought. It means that the moment another person senses you may withdraw, your attention, your business, your presence, your time, they are not calculating what you are worth. They are calculating what they are about to lose. These are not the same calculation. And the second one is the one that moves people. This principle operates in every domain with identical force. In negotiation, the party willing to walk away from the deal extracts better terms, not through aggression but through structural reality. Their detachment removes the other party's primary source of leverage. In a romantic dynamic, the person who has built a genuinely full life, full of options, interests, connections that do not depend on this one outcome, is pursued differently than the person whose availability is total and whose investment is visible. Not because the first person is playing a game, because they are operating from a different reality. A reality in which this outcome, however desirable, is not necessary. The critical distinction must be made with complete precision. Performed detachment, the pretense of not caring, deployed as a manipulation, is always detected. It has a quality of strain, a faint desperation beneath the posture, that the human social brain reads with unerring accuracy. The power does not exist in the performance. It exists only when the detachment is real. When you have genuinely made peace with the possibility of absence. When you have built deliberately a life in which no single person, no single opportunity, and no single outcome holds monopolistic power over your experience. This is how it is built, not through attitude, through architecture. Expand your options in relationships, in professional environments, in social circles, until no single node in your life carries enough weight to collapse everything if it disappears. The person who has done this is not cold. They are not closed. They are simply, structurally, genuinely free. And freedom, in a world of people who are managed by their attachments, is the rarest and most powerful position available. The person willing to walk away holds all the power. Let that sit with you for a moment. Not as inspiration, as instruction. What has been named must now be dismantled and rebuilt. This is the operational section, not a list of abstractions, a set of precise behavioral changes, described in the same voice that has diagnosed the problem. Because the problem and the solution live in the same register, eliminate over-explanation. Not gradually, not when it feels comfortable, not after a period of reflection. Immediately. The next decision you make, in any domain, at any scale, you make it and you do not narrate it. Someone asks why. You are comfortable with the silence that greets the question they did not need to ask. The muscle of non-explanation must be practiced in low-stakes interactions so that it operates automatically when the stakes are high. Every explanation you have withheld is a signal you have refused to send. Every decision made without apology is a small increment of architecture, placed precisely. Reduce your strategic availability. Do not announce this. The announcement is itself a form of explanation, and you have just learned the cost of explanation. Simply respond more slowly. Let invitations sit before you answer them. Allow your presence to become something that requires genuine investment to access, and observe, without commentary, without announcement, how the perception of your value adjusts. This is not manipulation. It is the accurate representation of a life that is full enough to not be perpetually waiting. Practice strategic silence in conflict. When something is said to provoke you, to test you, to locate your edges, and it will be, because the testing of edges is a constant feature of every social environment. Do not respond in the moment. 3 seconds of silence communicates more certainty, more control, and more structural power than any verbal response you could construct under the pressure of the provocation. The pause is not absence. The pause is presence, dense, controlled, and unmistakable. Develop an internal standard that does not require external ratification. This is the deepest work. It is the work of building a relationship with your own judgment that is so consistent, so grounded in actual values and actual evidence, that the approval of others becomes, not performatively, but genuinely, a secondary data point rather than a primary need. This is not arrogance. Arrogance is insecurity wearing a costume. This is the quiet certainty of someone who knows, without needing to announce it, exactly what they stand for. Audit the patterns with honesty. Where are you over-explaining? Where are you perpetually available to people who are selectively available to you? Where are you reacting when observation would serve you better? Where are you seeking permission for decisions that belong entirely to you? These are not character flaws. They are habits. And habits are the product of repeated choices, which means they can be changed by different choices, made repeatedly, beginning now. You are not disrespected because people are cruel. You are disrespected because you have trained them to be. And what was trained through consistent behavior can be untrained through different consistent behavior. The training does not require their awareness, their agreement, or their participation. It requires only yours. The person who has traveled through these 8 sections is not the same person who pressed play. That is not a motivational statement. It is a structural observation. Because what has changed is not feeling, it is sight. And sight, once developed, cannot be voluntarily surrendered. You now see the subconscious status assessment in every interaction you enter. You see the signal being broadcast every time someone over-explains, over-agrees, or laughs a fraction too quickly. You see the mechanism of scarcity operating in the way a certain person's unpredictability makes them more compelling than someone of objectively equal quality, who is simply more available. You see the boundary that isn't. The statement made and repeated while the behavior continues unchanged. You see the attachment being leveraged. You see the silence that is pressure, and you recognize it in the moments when it is used against you. This is not power as domination, it is power as clarity. The clarity of someone who has stopped operating on a map drawn by other people's convenience and has begun operating on the actual territory. In the comments, name the single behavior you will eliminate first, not to be held accountable by strangers, but because the act of naming it is the first act of the new architecture. The behavior that you name becomes the one you can no longer pretend you have not seen. What is seen cannot be unseen. What is named cannot be disowned. There is a deeper layer beneath everything this video has covered. A layer that explains not only how these dynamics operate, but why certain people, a small number across every environment they enter, seem to generate a different quality of response from the world around them without visible effort. That layer is what comes next. You are no longer the person who waits to be chosen. You are the person who decides what is worth choosing. The difference between those two people is not confidence, not charisma, not circumstance. It is the precise, daily application of everything you now know. Begin.